This project explores the kinds of distortions that go on in artificial intelligence. I'm particularly interested in how fundamental aspects of the technology lend themselves towards the amplification of difference. This plays out visually through the processing of data, and socially in the way machine learning is deployed out in the world. We're used to the idea of computers interpreting data for us, but as these systems gain power and autonomy, it's harder to assess how accurate they are and how generated content may affect our reality. It's also important to think about how an underlying logic based on the cultivation of difference ultimately informs the situations where artificial intelligence is applied. The name of the project, A Structural Plan for Imitation, Engines of Differentiation, came out of researching how algorithmic models affect the world. They ultimately restructure things based on patterns extracted from data, and this is in turn shaped by value systems that are embedded in the process. There are several sides to it. That we experience a reframing of relationships between the visual and non-visual images and data, and ultimately a logic of division that gets enacted through artificial intelligence. As a result, things start to take on the shape of the models that we use. This goes beyond visual representation, and we're not looking at merely copying real-world phenomena, but selectively replicating certain aspects while obscuring the specifics of this layer of interpretation. The piece takes the form of a video installation where the projections are distorted through a series of fresnel lenses. And it uses the process to reflect on how the visual becomes warped by machine interpretation. A starting point for the work was thinking about how difficult it is to visualize what goes on in AI systems in a way that is understandable for humans. This is part of my ongoing exploration of the history of algorithmic media, where I've been researching and experimenting with what implications AI has for art. Strategies of appropriation have become quite important in my work, and I use them as a way to respond to the flood of visual information we're immersed in currently. I never really think of images as being isolated in themselves. They're always part of larger, complex contexts of interrelationships. If you think about how much data is fed into training generative models, there are several layers of incomprehensibility. We're firstly faced with so much data that it's beyond our capacity to look at all of it. We also struggle to grasp the relationships that are produced between the input, how it's processed, and then a final output. There's no one-to-one relationship between the data that's processed and what ends up being visualized, yet they're inextricably linked. My collaborator, Alexia, and I talked quite a bit about the ethics of sourcing images from training data sets, archives, and content shared online. Even in the case that an image is free of copyright restrictions, it's problematic that pretty much all content can be consumed by these machines, and even a lot of training data is actually generated. So in this sense, there are multiple layers of appropriation and reinterpretation. This piece very much looks at the kinds of irresolution we have currently within visual culture. Instead of shying away from that, we used it as material for the work. It's also very challenging to develop ways to critique the technology without participating in the same ways that it gets things wrong. The piece tries to bring viewers into that thought process and the struggle of trying to make sense of it all.